So today, as we jump in, as we get into this Jesus story, the Jesus story we're going to look at today, this is week 10 of our Jesus story series, and the one that we're going to look at today, scholars call it the Great Banquet, or the Great Supper. Now, some of you guys, you might be getting ready tomorrow, or next week, rather, for a big Easter meal, right? We have an Easter meal at my house, and so we're getting the preparations ready, getting in advance, you know. Usually you got Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I think Easter's probably the third day, right, when everybody kind of gets together as a family, by and large. And so you're getting the banquet ready, you're getting the supper ready, and so that's what the entire story is about today. It's about prepping for this meal, prepping for this time when everybody's going to get together and join in. But maybe you've been somebody that's been invited to one of these Easter meals, and quite frankly, you really don't want to go, right? Like, you're not really excited about going, and so you got to figure out, how can I get out of this situation? Which is why I believe, you guys probably shouldn't be shaking your head yes on this one, right? Because you might have been invited with somebody else in the room. So in this, I would actually call it, instead of calling it the Great Banquet or the Great Supper, there's actually, you could call this the Great Excuse. Because there's a bunch of people that when they've been invited to this banquet, when they've been invited to this supper, they came up with all sorts of excuses as to why they weren't going to go. Right? Now, Robbie, you've been invited to my house next week. I don't want to hear any of these excuses, all right? I want you to be straight, okay? So as we're going to do this, we're going to jump right into the story, and it's in Luke chapter 14. So if you guys have your Bibles, let's go to Luke chapter 14. We're going to read this story called the Great Banquet, the Great Supper, or as I like to call it, the Great Excuse. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.'" Verse 18, "But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I just bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' This next one's amazing. Still another one just said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.'" What does that even mean? I don't even know. These are the 3 excuses that these people gave as to why they couldn't go. So let me explain a little bit of context here in this particular story. So what would happen back then is if you were having this big banquet, this big supper, there would be 2 invitations that go out. The first invitation would be to say, hey, on April 2nd, there's going to be a banquet. There's going to be a supper, and you're invited to it. So as you're there, and somebody comes to your house and says, April 2nd, you're invited, and then at that moment you say, oh yeah, great, I'd like to come. What you don't know is you don't know what time it's going to be, right? Because it's a little bit different back then, right? They actually have to kill animals, right? Like we just go to Publix, right? For them, they have to go and they have to get everything ready and everything prepared, so they don't know exactly what time it's going to be. So the first invitation is, hey, are you available on April 2nd? So you accept that invitation, and the second one is when everything's ready. Right, you get your second invitation, and they say, oh, you know what? Hey, I think I can get all this together by 5 o'clock. How about you go back to everybody who got that first invitation and tell them supper's ready, right? And you go out and you say, supper's ready, it's time to come, and this is the second invitation they're supposed to get. Which means that if you've accepted the first invitation, there should not be any reason not to accept the second invitation, right? Because all this food has been ready for you. It's been prepared for you. So if this invitation has been given out and you say, yeah, I'm going to go, that means somebody just killed a cow for you, bro. You got to make sure you show up. That's a pretty big deal. And so the fact that these guys were making excuses, it wasn't a really good look. Now, when you start thinking about these excuses that they made, it's even worse. The very first guy, he says, I got to go and see my property. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what that means. I bought some land and I got to go look at it. That's it, right? Now you go eat, right? I don't know exactly what this whole deal was. A lot of scholars believe what this means is that he bought some land and it's like some sort of real estate investment, right? You understand that. And so you got to go make sure that everything's just fine. But the thing is, if it's a banquet, if it's supper time, it's going to be close to dark anyhow. So how much time can you actually give, right? So this is just a pretty lousy excuse. But really what it wraps up in is that this is a man that had a lot of wealth. And this wealth was distracting him from going to this banquet. The second guy said, I got a bunch of oxen, and I got to go and try them out, right? It's like you go to the Toyota dealership, and you got to take it for a test drive, right? He's got to take his oxen out and figure it all out. Now, what exactly does this mean? I think it means that he's a big guy. He's got a lot of work to do, and I want to go make sure all this work is done. And so the first guy was distracted by women. The second guy was distracted by... hang on, I'm getting there. The first guy was distracted... I was distracted by women right there. My wife is right there. She's beautiful. Make sure it's really clear because the camera's on me right now. The first guy was distracted by wealth. The second guy was distracted by work. I'm going to get there. First guy was distracted. Ready for this? By wealth. The second guy, James, you ready for this? Distracted by work. Then the third guy, here's what the third guy says. I can't go because I got a wife. He was distracted by women. There we go. Now we're there, okay? Now what does this phrase mean? I can't go, I have a wife. Well, I guess it just depends on the tone in which you give it, right? Unfortunately, you can't read tone into the Bible. It'd be nice. I got a couple of different options here, okay? So the first guy, like the third guy, when he says, I can't go because I have a wife, well, first of all, like women, this doesn't, I don't agree with this, just to be clear, but women weren't allowed to go to these banquets, right? This is just for men, right? They were like preparing it all, but women weren't allowed to come. So maybe, hey bro, I just got married, like I have this wife, and she's not going to come, so I don't want to leave her here by herself, right? I just don't know how safe it's going to be, so I'm going to go. All right, then maybe, that's right. Fine, maybe. I remember though, when I was like 13, 14, something like that, and we were attending First Baptist Church of Tampa, right? Most of you guys know that. And then Sunday night, you'd have Sunday night church. After Sunday night church, though, we'd have the gym. We'd go play basketball every Sunday night. There was this guy, I won't tell you his name because he lived here in the area, but this guy that he was in his early 20s, and he told me, I saw him at the church, I said, hey, you going to come play basketball with us tonight? His exact words. He said, no, I can't go play basketball with you because I just got married. And I was a little kid. I didn't understand what that meant. I was like, you just got married? Well, like, does she want to come play basketball with us too? And he said, no, you don't understand. I just got married. And I was like, cool, all right, great. Yeah, so is that like a no? Is that a yes? Like, I don't understand. So maybe when this guy says, no, I can't go to this banquet because, I just got married. You know what I mean? You guys with me, right? I can't go because, I just got married. Or maybe he's like, I can't go because, bro, I just got married, and she ain't letting me do nothing, right? There's not a thing she's letting me do. I don't know what this guy is thinking, which tone he's using, but at any rate, it's a pretty lame excuse. Pretty lame excuse to say that I can't go to the banquet because of wealth, I can't go to the banquet because of work, and we're going to switch the W here and say I can't go to the banquet because of relationships. And in this, these are things that distract us from going to the banquet. These are things that distract us from doing the things that God wants us to do, which is why we come to our very first point that's up on the screen nice and large because we got our projector fixed this week, and it says up there, don't make excuses. Let's all say it together. Don't make excuses. And some of you guys didn't say that, and I want to know, what's your excuse? Why didn't you say it? Right? Already, right off the bat, you were making excuses for not using the words, don't make excuses. So here's the way this works. I was thinking about you guys as I was getting to this point. I was thinking about the fact that to plant a church, man, there's a whole lot of excuses to not do it. There's a lot of excuses to not do it. I was thinking when we planted Extraordinary Church, the things that I could have been distracted by, I'll be honest with you, I had a pretty nice job. I had a pretty good job. I got to hang out with some of these teenagers in here, like for a living. Like I'd go to Busch Gardens and they'd pay me to go, right? Like I had a pretty good job. I had a pretty good deal going. Right? We had some money. We actually had a 401k. There was like retirement. It's a weird thing. It's strange, and like every week I'd go to and there was like money in the bank account. It was so strange. It was this weird concept that I haven't gotten used to since we planted this church, but it was there, right? There was wealth, there was work, and then like my wife has been through a lot to plant this church. Right? She sacrificed a lot in order for this church to be planted, and I think that could have been another distraction. That could have been another excuse. I could have said, but you know what, I don't want to put her through this. And that's when she looked back at me and she said, you ain't putting me through nothing. I'm choosing to do whatever I want to do. I said, I know, let's go and plant this church. So what we know is that there's all sorts of excuses to not do the things that God wants you to do. But don't make them. Don't make them, because God is giving you the invitation to do something greater, to do something bigger. God's giving you the invitation to go and sit at his banquet table. God's giving you the invitation to go and to be with him in a relationship. God is giving you the invitation to take your relationship with him to the next level. Do not make excuses when God is inviting you to his banquet table. Christian, I'm just going to give you a little Oh, sorry, this is just between me and you right now, okay? I got my Uncle Robbie up here, all right? Now, I don't know how it's going to work in your church. I think it's going to be a little bit different in your church than in mine, but Robbie here's my clapper, okay? So what happens if I need some people to get through it, I literally just point to my uncle and watch this. Right? It's good, right? So you got to get that done. Yeah, sometimes I'm like, no. And then sometimes I'm like, I just need a break to just look through my notes, and I'm like, hey, Robbie, give me a break here. It's just going. It's all good. So anyhow, get you a Robbie, okay? All right, so as you're doing this, it's one of your dream team. Just put your dream team, I need a Robbie. Where's he at? So now what happens, though, is that I believe that in our lives, there's been 2 invitations, right? Remember, you go to the banquet, there's 2 invitations. The first invitation says, here's when the banquet's going to happen. The second invitation says, now it's time. It's time to go. So I think the first invitation that we've been given is the invitation to enter into a relationship with Jesus. That's our first invitation. We get that invitation, and he says, you can come in, and you can dine with me, I'll dine with you. Come on in and be a part of the family, be grafted in. That's the first invitation. And if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, and you've accepted him as your Savior, then you've accepted that first invitation. Which means when the second invitation comes, there's no reason to reject it. When the second invitation comes and God says, all right, now it's time to get to work, now we got to do it. That's what we've been called to do. We've been called to go to what's next and to do what God has called us to do. So now we have the story here, right? My Aunt Tessa right here. She's going to make sure I get it just right, okay? Now, just right, we have to have this story. What we always have to look at is context. You know that, right? So in the context, we got to figure out when Jesus is telling one of his Jesus stories, who is he telling it to and where is he at when he's telling it? So if you go back to the beginning of Luke chapter 14, you find that Jesus is telling the story while he's at a dinner party. Makes sense, right? He's at a dinner party. Well, whose dinner party is this? Oh boy. It's a dinner party thrown by the Pharisees, right? This isn't going to go well. This isn't going to go well at all. He's invited to this dinner party, and when Jesus is invited to this dinner party, he's not invited because he's good at table banter, right? He's not invited because he's really good at parties, or maybe they just wanted to turn water into wine, or like dirt into macaroni and cheese, because he could do that, right? Whatever. He wasn't invited for those reasons. He was invited, quite frankly, because they were trying to set a trap. And the trap is that this banquet happened to occur on the Sabbath. And so, as he got invited to this banquet on the Sabbath, you think, well, that's fine. They're going to go and eat at the Sabbath. He accepted the invitation. He's sitting there with the Pharisees. No big deal. The big deal is that there was somebody else invited to this dinner party. And this is really sad. Because as Jesus was invited as a trap, there was another guy that was invited just to embarrass him. There was a guy that was invited to this dinner party who was sick. And since Luke is the one telling this story, he's in the medical profession, and so he gives us the exact diagnosis of this guy, and he says that the guy that was invited to the dinner party had what they called dropsy. And dropsy, Dr. Nadal over here, he's shaking his head. He knows dropsy, right? The best thing, tell me if I pronounce this wrong, just go ahead and scream it out. But the best I can figure out today is that it's equivalent to edema. Did I pronounce that correctly? Am I doing all right? Good, all right. Now, if I do some Greek words, I'm going to come back to you too, okay? All right, but that's good. All right, so it's similar to edema. And the way this works is basically your body retains fluid. Okay, so for all sorts of different reasons in your body retains fluid, and so now maybe your arm would just like start to swell up. You ever seen that where like you can put your finger in somebody's skin and then the push, it just kind of stays there, you know? Like last night we went to go have Italian food. Yeah. And I had some dropsy in my belly last night, right? Like it was right, but not quite like that. That's not quite the way it works. It's not quite like my COVID-20 that I gained 3 years ago and I still haven't lost yet. I'm going to lose those 20 pounds. I only got 25 to go. So in this moment, he has this thing called dropsy, which is a very embarrassing kind of deal, right? He's getting bloated, he's getting really big, and it's really uncomfortable. And so what they did at this dinner party was they sat this man with dropsy directly across from Jesus, eye to eye. So Jesus had this decision to make. They knew that Jesus could heal him, but it was the Sabbath. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. So they're trying to trick him, trying to trap him. What are you going to do? Are you going to heal this man on the Sabbath, or are you just going to sit there and watch as he suffers? And Jesus says, no brainer. Bro, you're healed. You're healed. And he healed this man with dropsy right there at the moment. But what I think is even greater than that is then once he healed this man, he said, hey, bro, you can leave this lame party. Right? He actually told him to leave. He said, you don't have to stay here anymore. And he dismissed the man with dropsy, and he was all healed, and he left. And so now Jesus is sitting at this table, and now the man with dropsy is no longer sitting across from him anymore because he healed the man. The Sabbath is happening. Now they're going to say, hey, were you supposed to do that? You weren't supposed to do that. Let's have a conversation about this. And here's what Jesus tells them. Jesus says, all right, so you're really worried about this whole Sabbath thing, right? Well, what about if your son fell in a well on the Sabbath day? Then what would you do? And my son's sitting right there. If he fell in a well, I'd call somebody to help him, right? That's what I would do. I wouldn't do it myself because I'm just going to get stuck too. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'd call somebody to help him. Doesn't matter if it's a Sabbath day or not. I'd go back in. But what Jesus then said, because what I think he was thinking in his mind is that there might be some people that's like, bro, he got himself in that well, he can get himself out of that well, right? I think there's some guys that are sitting at that table that was like, I would just let my son sit in that well. So he said, what if your son fell in a well? Or what if it was an ox? Right? Like he just doing an extra. I think he did this for animal lovers, right? You guys know this, right? My aunt back there, my aunt loves her animals, and so we might even say to some animal lovers, all right, if a human being fell into a well, what would you do? Oh, I don't care, I'm not going in that well. But what if your dog fell in? I'm jumping in, baby, right? I think some animal lovers, you guys get that, and so I think he was talking to them too. He said, all right, so what happens if your son falls in a well on the Sabbath, or what happens if your ox falls in a well? What kind of well is that, by the way? Falls in the well on the Sabbath. What are you going to do? You're going to jump in and save him, and it doesn't matter if it's a Sabbath or not. So what I did was I looked at a man that needed help, and I don't care what kind of rules or what kind of boundaries or what kind of things you're trying to put on me. I'm going to do what God tells me to do because God told me to do it, period. Right? See, now you go back to my notes here. We got this done, right? Christian, you're learning so much today, aren't you? You had no idea you're going to learn this much today. So now what we do is we go back to the original story. Back to the original story. And we understand that in the context of this story, that Jesus was sitting at a dinner table. He just healed a man, told the man, bro, you can leave this lame party. You don't have to stay here anymore. And then he starts telling these stories. And the story that he tells is the one that we started out with today. As we started out with this thing today, as we started this conversation, now we've got to start thinking about the theological implications of this story. Right? Remember, as I set up the story to begin with, there was 2 invitations, 3 excuses, right? The first invitation about when the dinner party is, and the second, when supper's ready. Well, what happens here, theologically speaking, is that the first invitation, it was sent out to the people that were the Jewish people. Right? It's the way the Bible says it. The Bible says that salvation comes first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. Right? And the book of Romans says that in order to make the Jewish people jealous, we've offered salvation to the Gentiles. So theologically speaking, when we talk about this banquet, what we talk about is we say that first of all, that there was an invitation given to God's chosen people in the Old Testament, the Jewish people, God's chosen people. And the invitation was given that one day a Messiah would come. That there was going to be a coming Messiah. And when Jesus showed up, sitting at that dinner party, they were sitting with the Messiah that they had been preparing to come, and they rejected him immediately in that spot. They rejected the second invitation that was coming. In fact, they say in order to be a Pharisee, you got to learn a lot. You got to know the first 5 books of the Bible forward and backwards by the time you're 13, which is quite a feat. But then the latest studies that we have, the most recent scholar that we found says that in the Old Testament, from Matthew to Malachi, that there was 456 different references to the coming Messiah. Which means that 456 different times the invitation was given to them that there was a Messiah that was going to come. And yet when the Messiah was sitting at the table, they completely missed it. They completely missed the fact that he was there. I always wonder that fact for us as well. Like I wonder, like even in this room today, like he's here. He's here. He's in this room today. I wonder if sometimes we just miss it. Like we know, we prepare, we even prepared for Easter. We prepared to celebrate the coming Messiah. We plan to celebrate the Messiah that rose from the dead, that can't stay down in the grave, and he's here, and sometimes we just miss it. So don't miss the fact that the Messiah is in the room. And what then happens is because now, theologically speaking, the Jewish people rejected this coming Messiah, now salvation is offered to everybody. Which means that when you have this table, and when you're inviting this table, and when you're going and you're looking for people for Restoration Church, that means when you're going, first, you don't make excuses, and second, don't be exclusive. Because everybody is now invited to this table. Everybody is invited to be a part of this great banquet. And it doesn't matter if you have a dropsy, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a job, and it doesn't matter if you don't have work, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a wife. Wherever you are, whatever you're at, you've been invited to the great banquet table. Don't make excuses, and don't be exclusive. Because see, here's what happens next in this story in Luke chapter 14. In Luke chapter 14, the servants came back, and they reported to the guy who made the banquet. They said, sorry, all three people, 3 different excuses. So here's what he says next. Verse 21, the servant came back and reported this to the master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. I don't know about you, Christian, but that sounds to me like restoration. I love the fact that when they told us exactly who they were supposed to go and find, that if you look at it real close, you'll find that they were supposed to invite the opposite kind of people who made excuses. Watch this. First of all, remember the first guy, he had all that land, he wanted to go look at his land, and I said that he's been distracted by his wealth. So then the owner says, go and find me somebody who's poor and invite them in. Then the next guy he was distracted by his work. And they said, go find me somebody that's crippled and can't go and work with the oxen and bring him in. And then third guy was distracted by women. And they said, go find me somebody that's blind and bring him in so he can't see the fact that the woman is standing in front of him. Find me somebody that's crippled. Find me somebody that's blind. Find me somebody that's poor. Bring them all in. Don't be exclusive. Don't make excuses. They're eagerly awaiting. And because of this, because of the fact that the invitation has now been open for everybody, because of the fact that Jesus now allows this banquet table for all of us, no matter if we're rich or we're poor, whether or not we have a lot of wealth, whether or not we have a job or we're not, whether or not we're married or we're single, that everybody can be invited to this table, this banquet table. And because of that, we get the book of Romans that says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jews first and also to the Greeks. Then we have the book of Romans that says, anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And then you have the book of Acts that says, but you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And then you have the book of Titus that says, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. And then you have the book of John that says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And everybody has been invited to the great banquet table now. One more time. There you go. Now, because of this now, what we find is that it's not an exclusive table. You invite everybody to this table. Then we get to our third and final point. And this is Restoration Church, where I need to give you a caution, where I need to give you a little word of warning. Don't get exhausted. Don't get exhausted. What he says here is he says you're going to go out and you're going to find everybody that you can. You're going to go and you're going to look at every street and every alley. And listen to this. Here's what I love. I love the last part of this story. Verse 22. Sir, the servant said, what you ordered has been done, but there is still room. Verse 23, then the master told the servant, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. That's the story of Extraordinary Church. That's the story of Restoration Church. That's the story of the American church. That's the story of the worldwide church. That's the story of the church. The master said, go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house might be full. Which means that the banquet table is there and it's available. And it's available not just for you, but it's also available for your boss. And it's also available for your neighbors. And it's also available for your kids' teachers. And it's also available to your kids' principals. And it's also available to the person that you see at Lowe's and the person that you see at Home Depot and the person that you see at Walmart and the person that you see at some Kmart that's still open somewhere. Wherever you are, whatever you're at, whatever moment, it is available for them. So don't get exhausted. Go to every country road. Go to every lane that you can. And it doesn't matter if you live in Brandon. You go to Brandon and you tell people that supper is ready. They have been invited to the table by Jesus. And if you live in Riverview, you go and you tell people, Jesus is calling you. It's time to come. If you live in Plant City, you say, come on, Jesus is ready for you. If you live in New Tampa, you say, Jesus is calling. Let's go. If you live in Tononasassa, you say, Jesus says to come, and so you come. If you live in Fish Hawk and say, Jesus says it's time, it's ready. If you live in Syracuse, New York, you tell people, hey, it's time to come. Jesus says that supper's ready. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever moment that you're in, no matter what city you're in, the table is open and ready for everybody. Just don't make excuses. Tell everybody that you can that dinner's ready and it's time to come. As we close out today, Jacob comes and makes me sound more spiritual by playing something. I just want to take a moment here because what we're entering into today is we're entering into Holy Week. We're entering into the time, the week specifically, where more people are ready to come to church than any other time of the year. Today we're going to be around hundreds of people. A lot of them won't know Jesus. And it's our job to let them know that the table is there for them, that it's ready for them, that Jesus is telling them that he's got an invitation. For some of you guys, you got something in your heart right now, and you know that they're far from God. They're far from God. I was thinking of the story my brother gave last week as he came up here and told us about Recovery Church and what's happened at Recovery Church and starting that. Then I was talking to my Uncle Tim last night, and I didn't remember it till last night. But I remember how much he had come to me, and he said, man, we got to be praying for your brother. He's far from God. We need to pray for your brother. You remember that? I remember now because we started praying for him, because we started praying for him who was far from God to come back to God. I believe that last week we got to hear the Jesus story and to see what God will do to somebody who will come back home. And so in your heart, in your mind, I know that you know somebody that needs to come back home. I know that you know somebody that needs to come to the invitation and to sit at the table with Jesus. So we're going to ask you to pray for those people today. We're going to ask you to pray for those people, and I'm just going to ask you just in just a moment, we're going to be completely silent. And you're just going to say those names to God. You don't have to say them out loud. Say them in your heart to God. So then we're going to close out to pray for these people. So let's go ahead and bow your head and close your eyes. And just ask God to reveal to you. Ask God to reveal to you who it is that he wants to see you pray for.